Okay, please start.
Yes, so good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second session on Introduction to Sustainability. Today, we will be talking about the principles and goals of sustainable development. So actually, yesterday we had introduced ourselves to what sustainable development actually means, what is the context in which we are looking at sustainable development, and how sustainable development is being perceived worldwide, globally. Also, the concerted effort, which we call as sustainable development goals, how they came into being, how it all started with the Brundtland Commission report, moving on to the Millennium Development Goals, and how it has evolved today in the form of sustainable development goals. So today we will be looking more closely into what are the principles and goals. Okay, so what we are trying to achieve through our discussion today is to understand what are exactly the principles, what are the objectives and the use of the SDGs, and how to monitor and evaluate as well as evolve these SDGs so that we achieve what we started off. So first we have to understand one thing. Okay, so sustainability, as we know, is very much perceived as a means to preserve the natural capital in both the environment and the society. So what do we term as the natural capital? In very simple terms, whatever is existing naturally, okay, that is a natural capital. So in environmental terms, if we say, the natural capital consists of three different environments and its subcomponents: the air, water, land, and also the subcomponents, which are its ecosystems, the associated ecosystems with these environments, where we find chances for our resource usages, right? So, for example, if you take the water environment, water itself is a resource. We have several types of water-based ecosystems, aquatic ecosystems, what we call them as lakes, rivers, ponds, sea. All these are different ecosystems, and they contribute in some way or other to the global cycle, right? Cycle of nutrients is very major cycle that is also associated closely with the social cycle, which the humans form a part of. So this whole thing together, the ecosystem services, the environmental services, and the social services, these together form the part of what we call as the natural capital. So sustaining this natural capital is the very essence of sustainability, as we have understood. So decision makers use an approach which is called the triple bottom line approach. If you will recall our class yesterday, we defined this triple bottom line approach as the three pillars of sustainability: the society, the environment, and the economy, right? So the triple bottom line of these three pillars, the approach is to track and link their performances to the products, the facilities, and the enterprises which come about with the use of the natural capital along all these classes. So how do we measure the performance according to the underlying principles of sustainability? That is the key question that we are asking today. And in what context in which sustainability will be discussed or monitored or evaluated. So here I'd like to give a very good example, which was proposed by Vinny Mahajan, Secretary of the Ministry of Jal Shakti, Department of Drinking Water and Sanitation. She gave a very, very interesting, insight. She said that we people as scientists, we are able to quantitatively determine things, right? We can give a quantitative estimate for everything, but the qualitative assessment is also equally important when sustainability is concerned. So she says what we require is behavioral change assessment. So this component called behavioral change assessment is one very good way to track how sustainability is being incorporated across local populations, communities, nations, and globally. So she gave an example of using this behavioral change assessment among ASHA workers. So you all know that ASHA workers form a mainstream of health line workers, frontline health workers who reach out to the masses in the villages, who administer the medical facilities and create awareness among the villagers about all the other health programs, the family program, family planning programs, the children and education related programs. They create awareness among the village level and rural, especially the rural and the urban populations. So the change assessment that they have brought about in India. So this ASHA worker is a very special type of model which has come up in the world only in India. And they are actually since the time about 30-40 years, they have been in the front line of tackling, bringing medicines back to people in such a rate that the doctors cannot themselves work by themselves without the help of these ASHA workers, especially in the medium of communicable diseases. Their work has been very, very excellent in India. It has been vital to eradicate many diseases in India. In that way, the value of their interventions in terms of how they have intervened socially, because they have the connect with
इलेक्ट्रिसिटी बिल 6 जुलाई का 3,200 रुपए बिल आया हमारा.
So the value of the interventions that they have brought about on the social front and the interventions that they have brought about on the economic front, these two have been very key for creating awareness among people. But what that has led to is there is a section of people where migration is a very major factor, right? The migration is dependent on several other factors, societal and economic factors. If we take migration as a product of people wanting to reach cities for better healthcare facilities, definitely ASHA workers' intervention brought that migration down by several degrees. So this is not just in the health related field that they excelled, it was also on the societal front that they excelled. And what this mattered was that when people we can call them actors or participants of sustainability in the rural environment leave that environment, the unsustainable practices sort of come in at that position. But we need players, we need people, we need to keep people in the rural population, because they are the people who actually grow, produce, and they are the people who actually drive India's economy, being an agricultural country. So we need to keep these people in their own places and make them happy and give them all the facilities that is required. And ASHA workers' contribution was very, very valuable. So the value of those social interventions on maintaining sustainability was something which needed to be approached using the assessment that Vinny Mahajan had specified, basically the behavioral change assessment, and also building competencies. Again, the example of ASHA workers is very relevant here, building those health-wise competencies, societal competencies, and building a culture of evidence. Okay, so what is culture of evidence means? Evidence is something which proves whether a certain enterprise is a success or a failure. So evidence-based culture means we are having good monitoring and evaluation systems in place, which primarily tell us how we are progressing. And that is also a very core component when we come to sustainability. So when we say that the two vital principles of sustainability, number one, resource usage without losses, and number two, preservation of the services. When these two essential principles need to be satisfied, we need to develop a culture of evidence along with the way in which these are actually facilitated across different types of societies within a country and globally also. So here there is a very interesting paper by Fixel et al. I've also mentioned this here. They describe the overall methodology in terms of 4 principles. Okay, these they call the principles of sustainability. First principle, they said that any society or any country or any global units, they should concentrate first on both resource and value indicators. Now we have been talking only about resources, sustainability of resources. Now comes the concept of value. Okay, so why are we distinguishing between resources and values in terms of principles? Simple. Resource is the capital that we have. Value is not just the capital at present, but it is also futuristic, right? So what value it has brought culturally, it need not be only futuristic. It is also historic in that sense, historic, present, and futuristic values, which combine to give the actual value for any service. Now we call this a service because ecosystem provide what are known as regulating and provisioning services along with other cultural services, which help us live the way that we are living today. So the value that we achieve or we attribute to these ecosystem services is very, very essential. And that component is very critical for us to understand, not just as a resource capital point of view, but also from the value point of view. Next, they say we should, any intervention that is taken to achieve sustainability, it should explicitly represent the triple bottom line. So if, for example, we are taking an intervention by ASHA, if we are saying they helped us to achieve the SDG on good health and well-being, fine. But when we evaluating good health and well-being, we should also concentrate on the societal impact as well as the economic impact of such intervention, right? So here the triple bottom line of society, economy, and environment, all the three should be satisfied. So the methodology to understand how well the principles of sustainable development are incorporated in any given task to achieve the SDG targets, as we mentioned, and the indicators should explicitly represent the triple value or the triple bottom line. Okay, so the next thing that they consider is they say is that we should consider the full product life cycle. So this is a little different from the narrative that we have been having, and I want you to pay exclusive attention to this as we discuss more about this very point. Here the term product life cycle, okay, this is introduced. Product life cycle is very much a part of industrial activity, but industrial activities also are very much a part of our SDGs and enterprise, right? So which connects to the economic aspect, which in turn connects to the societal and the environmental aspects. So here, if we produce a product, we should keep attention to the fact that not only are the product manufacturing processes and the resource usage processes contribute to sustainability at all levels, but on the whole, from the point where it is manufactured, the point where it is used, and it is cycled, reused, okay, it should go through the circular economy that we described. So the whole product cycle should ensure sustainability. They are not just the components. For example, if we take an industrial process, we can say that industry achieved zero emissions, right? So that is something that is promoting sustainability at industrial or manufacturing level. But when it comes to a usage level, very good example of this is e-waste. So the industries which create the ICT products, this one very important perception that the COVID gave us is that there was a 110% increase in the manufacture of laptops during the COVID season. And what happened is that although the sales increased, right, the way in which these, we still don't know because we are going through that life cycle now, the way in which the excess of electronic circuit boards and the laptop manufacturing processes, they are contributing to environmental degradation is still under purview. So we still don't know the whole effect of this operation. So where we thought that ICT approaches were very, very advantageous and it helped us to satisfy other SDGs like learning, distance learning and education sector, we on the industrial innovation and the usage sector of sustainable usage production consumption targets, we little bit might have be biased against this kind of sustainable production and consumption cycle. We may not have achieved it, we still don't know. But if we have, say, an intervention which had looks at not just the industrial level of manufacture of these products and the usage scenarios in the domestic or the consumer base at present, But also futuristically, if we say we have a target, say we are having X number of units which are produced, which are surplus. How are we going to handle this as it goes through the product cycle so that the e-waste that is generated is also recycled? E-waste is also going through the circular economy process and not going to contribute to environmental degradation. Then it becomes a very, very useful strategy, and it satisfies the whole principles of sustainable development, of no losses, circularity, equity, and also the future generations' right to enjoy the environment as we are. So this is one example which is very relevant to us today. So it is very important then for us to consider both the leading and the lagging indicators. So that is why I gave this example of e-waste. Now you will be able to understand, on one side we are having leading indicators as in education, but on the other side we may be lagging on how we are consuming these products and how we are going to recycle them when they are in surplus, when the waste is in surplus. So we have to combine both leading and lagging indicators to understand how we go through with our own implementation of these four principles of sustainability. So here now I'm giving a very nice example of assessing SDG number 2, okay, that is no hunger. So here you can see there is a village. In the village, you see there are some rations which are arriving, right? These rations were delivered to these people in rural backgrounds. This seems very, very normal to you, but I want to tell you this happened during the lockdown phase. So what makes it special is that even during the lockdown phase, the governments were able to mobilize the kind of transportation and logistics so that people did not go hungry. So this was actually given a special name called Duare ration. This was actually practiced in West Bengal very effectively. And one of my PhD students, Mr. Sudeep Kumar Kundu, he brought back these two images, and I thought that they are very powerful images. He actually pictured them, and he told me about this experience that people were given these rations at their doorstep, which meant that even during the lockdown phase, which happened during the pandemic in 2020, people did not go hungry. And I think this is a very effective way for us to monitor and evaluate and say that we are good in the indicators of SDG number 2, right? We had a discussion yesterday about how bad or good poverty we are on the poverty and hunger appeasement SDGs. So we can very effectively say that there are at least parts in the country which are giving us a model to carry forward. So here we had this Duare ration model very well implemented at state level and at district level in one particular state in India. So this can be actually implemented in other states. It might have been, but this is another thing that I wanted to come up with. When we have some interventions, positive interventions like this, which have very good social and environment and economic outputs, we have to replicate them in considerably similar situations. Also, evolve them to suit any specific requirements across the nation. Then it becomes a national indicator which has been very successful. So this is one very good example that we have seen. The model is ready. So this is a very effective sustainable development model for SDG 2. But is it possible to replicate this, for example, for other SDGs or for other states and other contexts? So this has to be taken forth by social scientists and sustainability managers as yourselves, and also write about it, monitor, evaluate, and write and record this. So that recording is very, very important aspect as well. If you see, the Anganwadi model that we have in India is another excellent model. And this is where you can find consonance with the ASHA workers who also go at, reach. There is a place, there is this, we call this an asset. So we have an asset in the form of Anganwadi in every village in India, which provides the space for learning, provides the space to educate mothers against maternal mortality, to improve their health, and also improve the public health concerns. So here you see there is a the first picture on your left, it shows that there is a teacher who's sitting down and, talking to primary level children. There are several teachers behind. So this is a very excellent space to, bring children to school, first of all. Then you see the enthusiasm with which they actually participate in the process of education. On your right side top, you can see how a teacher is teaching very small children, and they're so encouraged, enthusiastic to participate in that. Then the bottom, just below that picture, you can see there is a sort of awareness campaign which is going around with the village women who are actually pregnant or expecting mothers. They are being actually advised by ASHA worker and also by doctors whenever it is possible. And then you can see there is also specialized attention being given for children who require them for some purpose. They can be special children, they can be, very poor children, or they may have missed classes for whatever reason. They are being counseled by a village level representative. So this is the kind of positive intervention model that can assure sustainability in a long term, right? So we need this connect with society. Yesterday we were talking about security. Security comes through such social interventions by behavioral changes and assessment of these behavioral changes. So as I already mentioned to you, if we take SDG number 3, child mortality rates in Anganwadis play a very important role. If you see the statistics, 79 girls per 1,000 births die before their 5th birthday in India, compared to 70 boys per 1,000 births, which means that although they're not very different, they're also not the same. And especially with reference to girls, the effective Anganwadi Center, AWC model of India, and the ASHA workers, they ensured that this is actually being reduced over the years. So the performance over the last 5 years has been so tremendous that we see the figure 79 there. It was much higher in the last decade, just before the last decade, where we had about 250 to 500 deaths per 100 live births. So per 1,000 live births. Okay, so that is before their 5th birthday. So this is the actually the effect that Anganwadi model and ASHA workers intervention has created, and this has also been reported in the National Family Health Survey in India. All this is available online for your reading. So here nationally, 72% of the samples were found to be covered by Anganwadi in India, and 62% by an Anganwadi worker. Okay, so the coverage of enumeration of these areas ranges from 100% in the state of Tripura. It is fully covered by Anganwadi to only 27% in Meghalaya. And I think Professor Khuman can, give his live example on that, how well or how practical and how true are these figures. But I'm just reporting what was given in the National Family Health Survey. And more than 4 in 5 children, that is 81%, are covered by an Anganwadi center, which is a huge development over the previous years. So if we consider all this, we take stock of all this, now we say that we know the principle of sustainability. Also, now will include not only just resource use and the value use, but also monitoring. Now comes the problem of how we define the manifold forms of sustainability. If you remember, a little while ago, I asked you to understand and concentrate and remember the word product life cycle. Okay, so when we are thinking in terms of sustainability, sustainability has different definitions in terms of corporate definition, in terms of economic definition, social, environmental, and ecosystem definitions, which makes it very complex for us to actually understand and report sustainability on all these perspectives together. So there are several global discussions on this as well. And if you see, there are actually international organizations which don't consider sustainability as should form a narrative of their reports, global reports, for the only purpose that there is ambiguity on what sustainability means. So the context here is very, very important. And I'm going to discuss this because we need to be neutral in our assessment of principles and what sustainability exactly means. So the first way in which sustainability is defined by corporates and economists is that economic activity in the present, which does not disproportionately burden future generations. So here, environmental preservation is equated as a function of overall financial analysis of the resources alone, which actually contribute to economy or don't contribute to economy. So we call it service or disservice to economy. So the financial assessment forms the key mode in which environmental or preservation and societal preservation is practiced or is perceived in terms of its sustainability. But if we see the social aspect of sustainability, what we call as social sustainability, the idea is a little different. It does not just, equate sustainability to economic security or equity or financial analysis. Rather, it actually depends on the mechanisms and processes by which a community can fulfill its needs wherever it is possible and also take it forward for future generation. So here, advocacy forms the part of the definition of social sustainability. So if you ask a social scientist what sustainability means, they would say that it is the use of political advocacy to meet the needs when the usual mechanisms or processes of societal value are not available for people to satisfy this. So there are these two aspects. They form what are the basis of the principles of social sustainability, which is intergenerational, societal, and intercultural equity of access and community ownership of resources, creating awareness and political participation in the way that resources are being used. So this is their definition of sustainability, which is very different from the economics or the corporate's assessment of resource base and resource value and natural capital assessment, isn't it? So now if we see the third and a very, very fundamental aspect in the way in which sustainability is defined, that is in terms of environmental or ecosystem sustainability, which actually means conserving the provisioning, regulating, and cultural services of ecosystems, as I mentioned. So what is provisioning? I want to dwell a little bit on that. Provisioning is if, for example, we have a pond. Pond provisions the habitat and the nutrients and the space for fishes to live and multiply and grow and produce further generations. Okay, so those are the provisioning services or the very basic level services. There are regulating services. By the presence of the pond, the water cycle, the nutrient cycle, and the climate itself and the weather is being regulated. Okay, so is carbon sequestration capacities. So are many other small factors which actually help to make this a habitat for survival of organisms. So those are regulating services. Finally, we have what are known as cultural services. So people, it also forms in terms of provisioning for the society of humans, if you see, which live near the pond, they depend on the pond for the food resources. So from a human perspective, it is also provisioning, and it also gives a cultural space, a space where the humans use this setting for their cultural activities, and also, they form a bond for the societal development in many aspects, not only the economic aspects, but also the socio-cultural aspects. So here, the conservation of all these services together is what the environmentalists and ecosystem modelists define as sustainability. Here, we have to understand that the environmentalists and ecologists and people who study nature, they will say even the smallest minimum portion of the environment or ecosystem or the organisms themselves, they have to be preserved. It must be prioritized. Conservation of their populations should be prioritized, or conservation of the habitats should be prioritized than, making them useful for some economic activity or gaining some sort of profit from them, or making them part of the social narrative of ownership, advocacy, or awareness, more beyond both these areas, the conservation of the bare minimum of these natural assets and capital must be prioritized. Why? Because they are important as functional regulators of life itself at a basic level. So this is their definition of sustainability. So now we have the problem of the manifold forms of sustainability, which have to be incorporated into our principles. And that is why now you will appreciate why SDGs are so important to incorporate all these sorts of definitions and objectives and perceptions into specific target and indicators. So moving forth, now we actually understand principles of sustainable development in 4 different ways. Okay, so why I had this discussion brought up is that we have to understand many of us cannot compromise with how economists see sustainability or how social scientists see sustainability if you are on the other side, if you are an environmental scientist, say. And an economist cannot understand why the environmentalists are so behind, saving every specific organisms that they come across, whereas there has to be a balance between the societal and the economic activity. That is more important for an economist. So since we all come from different backgrounds, we have to understand the other perceptions behind sustainability and try to integrate all this into our understanding. So moving forth, the first principle that I talked about just now extends to this idea. One is unraveling and reflecting on the ethical values involved in sustainability. Now, the coming of ethics is very, very important dimension to sustainability. So this actually brings everybody together, the economist, the social scientists, and the environmentalists together to find a common ground in what is the ethical way or path towards sustainability. Examples, how do we do this, is use of values and valuation of different stakeholders. So here we actually come to a common ground by bringing different stakeholders of any particular environment, any particular ecosystem into our discussion. And the discourses should also actually understand what are the values which are underlying the sustainability of these places or things or people itself. Here, it is very much bound to happen that power issues come to the forefront, right? And the philosophical foundation should also be brought to the forefront. When we have all these on our table, we can actually discuss and come with what is the methodological approach towards sustainability, how we can develop the effective socio-political mechanisms, and also use cultural practices to evaluate how to bring in sustainability to a particular context. So I give an example in the form of a traditional fishing enterprise. Okay, so is it important for us now to promote small scale and traditional fishers who bring in less profits, and arguably they are more on subsistence type of enterprise to, just to get the kind of food security that they require? It is not even the employment opportunities or the equity or the gender equality aspects. It's just to satisfy their basic needs. The first 4 clusters of SDGs that we saw, just to satisfy that, they are on subsistence level. Should we actually focus on their improvement, or should we actually bring in more economically viable and more secure practices of mechanized fishing, which bring in more profits and through which become instruments for societal change over several years? So this is a very difficult decision to make, right? So here you can see there's, I put an advertisement of, it's a screen grab of an app called Fresh to Home, which says good things come in small boats. Okay, so it promotes what is known as working closely with grassroots level fishers who go along fishing in small boats. They use very small gears, which are apparently, very, very useful and very, very, they don't harm the environment much. and they're also able to deliver freshly caught fish, which they buy from these traditional fishermen, and within 24 hours they're sent to you from the time that they are captured. So they say that this actually effectively negates the need for any preservation processes, storage procedures, which consume more energy. So here you see there are several goals of SDGs that are captured by this very enterprise, right? So it's a very, very effective way to deal with the situation by which the poverty aspect of fishermen can be alleviated. Also the food security, they have markets which give them the security that whatever they capture is going to give them economic value for their enterprise. It also makes them be traditional fishermen and perform well in other aspects. So it's a very, on the surface, it looks like a very, very ethical approach, and probably this very principle of using ethical background to judge an enterprise, whether it's sustainable or not, is satisfied by this approach. So this was also actually part of the debate and the deliberation at the recently concluded World Trade Organization 2020 meet. I hope that you all have been following this, and there was a thrust for traditional fishers, which was reported widely in the media in India. And our Minister Piyush Goyal, he had been there, and he said that we are going to never compromise on the employment and the livelihoods of traditional fishermen. So the app that you see here and the enterprise of using traditional fishermen and remunerating them for their services is a very, very fine approach. What about the environmental aspect? Does the socio-economic model that we are seeing here cause any environmental harm? No, because the traditional fishermen and small motorized boat owners, they do not cause big issues environmentally as well. And also, although we cannot say that they will not capture fishes during fish ban periods, where the fish larvae and the juveniles come to the from the open sea to the coast, to the mortality rates may also trigger loss of stocks over further years. We cannot assure that, but the impact of those would be less. But if we consider mechanized fishing, on the other hand, mechanized fishing boats don't need to go to the sea every day as traditional fishers. They can go for say a 10-day tour at once, and they can bring in so much of fishes from away from the coast that the issue of stock diversification, etc., may not be applicable on the coast or the near shore environment, but it will definitely have an impact on the open sea side and the deep ocean environment, right? And the bycatch, see, when they're doing mechanized fishing, they haul in all the possible types of fishes which are caught in the net. They do not differentiate between the species, so they throw out what is not economically viable species. So those are known as bycatches, and the bycatch actually is found to be higher than the actual catch, which means that the bycatches are not live organisms, they are dead organisms. The mechanized boat goes in, it fetches so much organisms, most of them dead. And when they return back, the bycatch back to the sea, they are just adding to the debris, and they're not adding to the life capacity of the oceans. So in that way, they may harm the environment. But on the economical side, operating a mechanized boat gives in 2x to 4x times the profit of traditional fishermen. So now we have to make a value-based judgment here upon what we think is right and what we think is not right. So there is absolutely going to be power issues associated with how the government is going to promote small-scale fishers versus how they are going to help the mechanized fishers. And there is bound to be actually the discussion on the economic viability of this operation. So it is not very simple issue. This is what I wanted to highlight. By taking this example, I'm highlighting how complex it is in a real-time basis to bring in the principles of sustainability and apply it to a real-life scenario. So moving on, let us look at the second principle, spelling out what sustainability values guide research into linking science, society, economy, and the environment. Okay, so here now we are bringing in the concept of research onto the sustainability values. First, we brought in the ethical aspect, the value aspect. Now we are bringing in the research aspect. And how we can, incorporate this principle is by using the values which are described in a scientific literature. So here we say, if we bring in the same example as before, we can say that the scientific literature says that overcapacity fishing can lead to effective decline in the fish stocks in the next decade, which means that it is also going to affect the economic activity. So in that way, we can push for sustainability to balance both the economic and the environmental aspects of fishing. So example is, another way in which that this can be done is defining the values by legitimate societal actors. Here, legitimate means who are the stakeholders themselves who will be directly affected by any operation, right? So the societal actors here, as I already mentioned, are the traditional versus the mechanized boat owners. Then we also consider different stakeholders. So the consumers are also stakeholders. So as consumers, we have the say to say what type of fish you want to eat. Do you want to have exotic fish species for your dinner every day? Or are you satisfied with traditional fishes, right? So what the society demands need to be satisfied by the fishers and the producers. So in that way, sustainable production and consumption cycle can actually trigger a range of research themselves, and from the effort of research we can come up with the scientific indicators and actors, legitimate effect of legitimate actors to drive forth the point of sustainable development. So the methodological approach here that we are looking at is to take a disciplinary, which is confined to a discipline, as well as interdisciplinary, which is confined to different disciplines, to bring in and address the issues concerning sustainability. Now, actually, the example for this is using or engaging internal as well as external stakeholders in the decision cycle. So I already gave that example to you. So what we call as concurrent governance is that the framework that is able to identify the performance or growth by incorporating scientific values as well as ethical values should be region specific benchmarks. So it should result in region specific benchmarks, and it has to be accepted by the region or even at local level. So what is the data that we collect for this is very, very crucial. First, we should have data which help us to profile what are the actual issues at ground level. Second is, we have to have data on what kind of measures can be prioritized. So there can be n number of measures to tackle a sustainability issue. But what are the priorities within those measures? How do we rank them? That is very important. Then we come up with actual ways to program action within these prioritized measures. And the fourth way is to completely have a framework to evaluate the progress that we are making by profiling, adopting, and programming the action. So, creation of state program officers and specifying the implementation periods is a very, very essential part of the concurrent governance model. Actually, this can actually help if the government promotes data exchange itself, okay, between the different societal actors, between the internal and the external stakeholders, between the government departments themselves, and within local bodies which are helping to implement these action plans. So this model of effective concurrent governance is one aspect which can incorporate sustainable development principles very well to reach our final goal of sustainability. So the third way is to find common ground on what sustainability means in specific contexts. So that's why first we thought actually our rule of or principle said we have to incorporate ethical values. Then the second one said we have to incorporate scientific values from our research. As I already pointed out in a previous slide on an elaborate discussion, the problem fixing or the framing the sustainability issue itself is a problem, because it is looked at in different ways. So in a specific context, we have to find a common ground on which we place this definition of sustainability. Here, participatory problem framing and participatory vision development are two guiding principles. So if for example, we have a one-man commission who is asked to, or a one-person commission who is asked to, deal with this issue and come up with a suitable definition for sustainability, it will never be accepted by the society. So here we do need different stakeholders and leaders. It's not just stakeholders, they should be led by leaders who come in and effectively participate in the way in which they want to say that sustainability in our context. For example, say the Fisher's context itself is going to be defined by 60% of economic sustainability, 40% say of societal values, or nothing of environment. This is one model. Another model can say it can define 50% of growth as economic sustainability measures which contribute to overall sustainability. 20% should be how the community takes ownership of the resources that are available to them to pursue sustainability, and 20% say should be helpful for conservation of the genetic resources or the biodiversity. So in this way, when we have this clarity on what model a society is going to adopt, how much of values it is going to place on economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, or societal based sustainability, it will drive the programs that come into the sustainable development for that region, for that community and that space. So it should be agreeable. This is also time dependent. Okay, we have to understand that at certain times the decision taken at one time cannot be replicated or reused for another time frame. So it has to change with the evolution of the society. These aspects of how we are dealing with sustainability issues will also change, and we have to evolve with that. So those decisions have to be taken into consideration while a program or an effective, robust program is incorporated for a context-specific approach. So here, more than the disciplinary and the interdisciplinary, we need a transdisciplinary approach, which is mentioned as the methodological approach. And that is, since I mentioned evolution, it is a learning process and it is a social learning process. So social learning with societal actors actually present, deliberation and co-production of the knowledge on how well the sustainability aspects have been incorporated in a model or how well they are not being incorporated, so that we can take effective action. So here, one very exciting example from India is what is known as the Aspirational Districts program. Okay, so we understood now that it is not just easy for us to take a transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary approach to achieving sustainability, but our principle should also incorporate transdisciplinary approach. How do we bring it in terms of the societal upliftment? So that is what is actually being incorporated by Niti Aayog in this program. So by their own definition, Aspirational District Program aims to quickly and effectively transform 112 most underdeveloped districts across the country. So there was an exercise which has identified this 112 most underdeveloped districts, which involved administrators, senior level IAS officers, and many big, social scientists. And the broad contours of these programs are: number one, convergence of the central and the state scheme, collaboration between the central, state, Prabhari officers as they are called, and district collectors themselves, and competition among districts through monthly Delta ranking scheme. They have evolved a ranking scheme called a Delta ranking scheme. This is all driven by a mass movement. So this is actually a very good way or a very good model to achieve sustainable development. And Karnataka state in the past year has been termed as one of the best performing states in India. But what did it do differently? I learned about this at the Niti Aayog conference, where it was mentioned that the three different approaches that Karnataka took helped to get this spot for itself in the last assessment. Number one was that it simplified the data availability across state departments, local bodies, and also to bring in central government data into state repositories. So the simplification of this data availability itself meant that there are people who are not able to look at actual data earlier, were able to look at those data and see where things had to be improved. Also, the movement of data and the resources, those were coordinated to reach the frontline workers. For example, the ASHA workers who are there to promote these targets and to put these action plans in space. Okay, so this was a big achievement. There must have been many hurdles, but having good policies which said, yes, so our policy now is to contribute positively to the aspirational districts program so that our state can be at the forefront of this activity. With that policy in action, the state government was able to simplify the data availability, was able to simplify the resource availability to the frontline workers, and also had the leadership mindset in place. Because the leadership was also very important here. Leadership should agree to the policy that the state evolved around the aspirational districts program. So questioning any data or processes which contributed negatively. For example, there can be hurdles where higher officials say, no, this data cannot be shared. But the leadership there should be able to convince those people and tell that, no, we need the movement of this data across, only then we can create positive outcomes. So this was a positive interventional space which was created using this program in forefront, just the aspirational district program, which led to the success of the activity in the state. So that is a very powerful example that we are seeing for this very rule of or principle of sustainability. And the final principle is reflexive clarification of researchers' own normative and epistemological ground. Okay. So see, actually, there is always a bias. Whenever a person reports something, there is a personal bias, right? On a scientific aspect also, this carries forth. Whenever a researcher is researching something, availability of data simplified, we have data, all that. But what is our stand on the data? Are we looking at the data in the way that is positive or negative? So who can define what is positive or negative? That is the epistemological ground. Normative ground, is it actually positive or negative? Or what is correct, what is positive and what is negative? So the example is that individual and disciplinary values and understanding of knowing should evolve. What are the kind of clarifications that the researchers provide on the data sets related to sustainable development and growth to the society? Okay, so by self-reflection and self-learning within and beyond the academia and the ethics of science, now all the three principles that we earlier discussed come into action here. We need the ethical component satisfied without to negate our bias on the data. We need very strong scientific foundations and understanding and knowledge so that we don't confuse between the right and wrong. And we also need the people's participatory approach, and we also need the effective leadership approach to to self-reflect and come up with positive outcomes from the social learning angle. So combined with this, we can be able to term that some measures that we use to achieve sustainability is positive intervention and some were negative intervention. So this has to be a very methodological approach that we need to take so that we can actually determine where our progress has been in sustainable development angle. So here I see that one example I would give is a sort of a case study which was brought about by Ashoka University Center for Social and Behavioral Change. So they gave a framework. Okay, so how do we actually use sustainability principles to improve the quality of life? They term it behaviorally informed social interventions. So this knowledge becomes very critical because we involve the human behavior at the center of the intervention design. Okay, so they are defining what is the behavioral problem first. if we have some intervention in place, what is the problem for the end user, which will make this whole operation unsustainable. So knowing this, starting from this, they would take into target the biases from different stakeholders, the existing habits and the social norm, to discover what are the developmental challenges first, and then to adopt a specific approach to develop the interventions themselves. Next step would be to validate this in the field, right? And the final way is to advocate this or institutionalize what worked for that community. So this is a very effective approach. So let us take, for example, if we are relating air pollution and public health, which is a major issue. If we say that we cannot start with, there are different types of behaviors. First of all, we have to understand which contribute to air pollution. First thing is urbanization, which contributes to more vehicular movement. We can identify that as a core issue, or we can identify the rural households where, the use of chula, they contribute to poor public health conditions. We can identify that as another behavioral aspect. Then we can also identify climate change related behavior of human beings. Taking more flights, for example, can contribute to higher, GHG emissions, is one very, very standard type of jargon that we come across, which we can actually term from the behavioral aspect. So once we have had a cluster of these, issues, we can actually identify and develop interventions around this issue. So, for example, creating a space where carbon negative behavior is becoming the norm. Okay, so if we are culturally promoting this across the society, it becomes one very, very useful behavioral intervention to bring down not just carbon positive or carbon high carbon emission scenario, but also to tackle air pollution in the core way that it is possible to address that. In that way, we are also linking it to the other SDG concerning public health. So now we have to understand that cultural practices, governance issues, both will add also biases as much as the scientific or the research aspects. And we have to come to a compromise between all these biases together to take a further take on sustainability development measures. Second is, we have to assess, do we have the enough scientific information? So if we have, then we also have to assess, as I said, the biases within it and try to bring in more useful data sets wherever it is possible. Finally, we have to understand that when we are averaging some things, okay, they will hide what is the reality in ground level. For example, we can say India on an average has an unemployment level of only 10%. Say, this is just, it's not an official figure. I'm just giving an example. If we say 10%, that 10% is not going to be uniform across different parts of India. There can be parts of India where the unemployment is as high as 40%, right? So, but the average is, when we average all the figures together, we come up with a 10% figure for nationwide. So we have to understand that where our scientific data comes from, it cannot be always be accurate. We have to have that understanding, and then actually build interventions around the more robust data sets which we are able to obtain. So now there are three different approaches for generating the good knowledge that we require to implement the 2020 agenda. As I already mentioned, those are the disciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary approaches. But it is also important that we have to understand that sustainable development is an evolving or ongoing inquiry, and there is a system limit management which approach that can lead to resilience assessment at several spaces. So we have to actually back this resilience assessment using scientific terms itself, so that we need scientists for this approach. But to facilitate how these processes are taken forward, we need the professional facilitators who can be administrators or managers. And there is another dimension in which the sustainability is understood in the frame of inter and intragenerational justice. So we need a legal team. We need a group of people who we can rely on for achieving the goals of sustainable development. And those are politicians and stakeholders who push these agenda forward. So now this actual slide shows where in science and society sustainable transformation can be effectively understood and taken forth. I leave it to you to just go through this societal role of science, but I just like to highlight the 5 major roles that the science plays in pushing sustainability forward. First role is to contribute in the form of core science. So core science is going to give us the actual data, the quantitative data for assessing a baseline situation, and not just the baseline, the progress, as well as where the lacuna or the lagging indicators are. So core science contributes to it in the terms of actual measurements. But we can also use science as a lobbyist tool. So we can say that once we know where we are lagging, we can have a contract-based research conducted to identify the exact gaps. Okay, and this can be agglomerated with the science, social system practices which are in existence. So in that way, a scientist can also be called as a luggage carrier, rather than not just the core science workers who are known as knowledge workers. They can also be luggage carriers. So it's a very interesting way to define the science society relationship. Apart from these 2 core roles, science can also be agent for transition. So transitions management is very important, because with sufficient data, we can say when the data is very reliable, you say, no, the unemployment rate is exactly 20%. It is not between 10% and 40% or 50%, where the breadth of our activities also increase, but the effectiveness of incorporation of action plans will come down. If we can actually say 20% and our target based on science do with scenario management models in place, we can bring it down in the next 2 years to say 15%. And it should also be realistic. So in that way, the transition management aspect can be pushed forward by science. So scientists can also be activists in that sense. So it's also a role of activism. Then we also have not just in managerial terms, but actual transition science, how the specific process led to increase in sustainability and how a specific process helped to enhance sustainability. Understanding that process itself, the transition itself, is very, very important. So scientists can be catalysts. So for example, if we say that, an example was given where, the maternal health was an issue, but it was not actually linked to the proper context. So what exactly happened was, the maternal health issue, when the public administrators discussed, they were concentrating only on creating awareness among women to improve their own health conditions, so that in future they can give rise, they can become very healthy mothers and bring down child mortality. There was a link which was made between infant mortality and maternal mortality, when scientists told that the figures are interrelated. But when scientists looked at more data sets, it became a very interesting research, because now they knew that they can actually sustain, when there were measures in place like healthy food habits, awareness about, when to vaccinate and when to give proper nutrition and what type of diet the mother should have and what is the proper diet for the infants, all this increased and the mortality rates came down, but only for that one generation. The data for successive generations showed that the measures were not being effective. So what was the role of science in this was that through the data, the administrators and the scientists were able to determine that education can be a powerful medium to take forth the experiences and the messages that they shared with one generation to the other generation. Right? When the mothers, when they were really young, they were educated about how they can, train themselves to be good mothers in future by eating well, by exercising well, by knowing what medicines to take at what point and how could they monitor themselves, how they should reach the doctor in time, and what are the kinds of medical interventions that they require or monitoring they require as mothers. Effectively through generations, they were able to achieve very low infant mortality rates, and very low maternal mortality rates. So that is where the intervention, although it is very small, the scientific data there can act as catalyst to achieve sustainability over a longer period in time. So the strategic planning by transdisciplinary methods is very, very important. So science can push that. And finally, science can also be a public good in a democratic society. Anybody who has the understanding of the data and the inherent capacity to use the data can be scientists. Okay, so they are facilitators of efficient knowledge use. So in that ways, science as a public good can also position itself in promoting sustainability. So these are the ways in which science and society together can achieve sustainable transformations. Here I want to show this particular graph here because we have a differential understanding about the different SDGs that we come across and how much they have been. I only spoke about science and society. Now the economy part, if we see, you see over the years, from 2018 to 2022, the SDG goals have been funded in different ways. So above the orange box on your left, you see the year and in USD, the amount that was allocated for global implementation of the SDGs. If you see, 2021 had the highest global allocation, and 2023 and 2024 are not yet complete. Okay, the fund allocation is not yet complete, but some allocation has still gone into it. So let's leave those 2 years. If we take from 2018 onwards to 2022 onwards, you see 2021 post the pandemic received more budgetary allocation from United States to achieve the different SDGs. So it is not just in India, the whole world actually faltered on the SDGs target achievements, and hence it required more investment from different sectors. But if you see, even within the different sectors which contribute to SDG goal achievement, the first goal took the priority, has always taken the priority. The first 3 goals rather have taken the priority in the last 5-6 years. Since 2018 onwards, there is data ahead of 2018 also. I did not plot them. I could only plot these data sets. I thought understanding the situation from 2018 onwards is more easier approach for our class today. But you are free to go to uninfo.org, where you can also take these values and you can plot and see. So interestingly, the graph shows that SDG 2, the hunger SDG and the education SDG, those had more fund allocation compared to rest of the SDGs. Also, peace justice SDG had the yellow one that you see right at the end, that had more allocation for global funding to achieve these SDGs. So how science has actually contributed to understanding of SDGs is also a reflection on how the budgets are allocated to achieve these. Right? So this is not just reflective of the money or the economic aspects of SDG or sustainable development. It is also a reflection of how much data we have, how much robust data we have. So that is the reason I put this slide for us to understand together where there is lacuna. See, if you see SDG 14, you hardly see that color on the graph because it has been a constant 0.4% allocation over all the years since 2016 onwards. If you see the data, you will understand. So SDG 14 deals with life below water, right? So that deals with oceans, which cover a huge percentage of Earth. But still, the allocation to target to achieving sustainability for this very target of SDG 14 is still the most minimal. So there is some sort of inequality. Yesterday, we had a discussion of whether SDGs themselves were unequal. Yes, this graph actually reflects this, but it also reflects, we cannot take just in terms of, whether we are biased by allocating this like this. I say although we have not gone into allocating it, the whole, the global society, which contributes to data on scientific data on this, societal data on that to put everything together, budget allocation happens at the highest possible levels at the UN. So we have to actually push the agenda of contributing to more of data, which will help the planners to allocate more funds to achieve SDGs in that particular area. So this is one bottom line that we have to understand. So now we understand that to put everything together that we have learned, we understand that the orientation of science and the inter-science autonomy is very important for us in several ways. Number one is to acknowledge the uncertainties which are present in the data sets. Number two is to integrate the transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary approaches for dealing with sustainability. Third is to utilize the knowledge and relating it to social, natural, and engineering sciences. Fourth is to attract the consensus of the different stakeholder groups. Fifth is to use the data to overcome the constraints in generating and using more reliable knowledge. And finally, to come up through this understanding with the state of the art scientific knowledge, which will help us to have targeted policies to achieve sustainability. So this is the whole plethora of what we have been talking about. So the focus of SDGs in practical terms is to apply it to social protection floor systems to end the SDG challenges. We should apply it in principle to both urban and rural scenarios differently and on context-based terms. It should also be approached using the GDP or the gross domestic product narratives versus the resource usage from an ecosystem perspective. And finally, we should also consider among the narrative of the achieving SDGs, what are the economic and the environmental losses from natural and anthropogenic disasters. So this is actually an example that I quickly want to give you. This is actually available in Niti Aayog's website also. This is actually a screenshot that I've taken from the Aspirational Districts Program indicators. Here you can see that the target set for 2030 in the table that you see, the sex ratio at birth per 1,000 female, the target set is 954. Okay, why I'm talking about targets now? Okay, till now we talked about what has to be achieved. Now the approach should be towards the target. Is it possible for India to achieve 954 per 1,000 male sex ratio by 2030? Another aspirational objective that India has taken up is that the average female to male ratio in terms of the wages or salary received by regular employment in the age group of 15 to 59 for rural and urban should be equal, and it should be 1. That means every female versus male should get the same amount of average wages. Then this was actually the period assessed is only 22. I'll come to the period assessed. Let us look at the targets for now. Now we don't have a target at all regarding the percentage of ever married women in the age group of 15 to 49 who have experienced violence, domestic violence, especially spouse violence. We have not even assessed the situation in terms of SDGs till now. Then we have about the target as 50 for the percentage of seats for women leadership in general elections in state level legislative assemblies. So this is one specific target that is being carried forward. Then the ratio of female labor force participation to male labor force participation should be 1. This is another target that has been set for 2030. Then the percentage of women in 15 to 49 years age group with access to modern methods of family planning should be 100%. Okay, so this is another target for 2030. Now we have these targets set by several action groups in India. But if we see the period assessed, they are different, right? The period assessed are not very, I would say, very robust in terms of providing the scientific knowledge that we require to carry forward activities in the future, in the run-up to 2030, to achieve the targets that have been set. So this is actual truth. Okay, so this is actual practical way in which the SDGs are captured by the indicators. Niti Aayog has been very bold and very open enough to put these figures on their website itself to show how the country has been able to capture the UN SDG targets for the above indicators. Indicators 5.1, 5.2, 5.5, 5.6. These are the 4 indicators for which we have some sort of action plans in place. We have not even touched the rest of them, right? So here, in terms of unpaid care in India, it's very difficult situation, because all these indicators that we are looking at is some way connected with how women actually perform in the workspace as or their participation rates. And we see that the national figure is 85% of women spend greater than 10 hours a day in unpaid care. That means they are not paid for what they do for 85% of women. There is only 15% of women who are getting paid. It is very difficult for us to visualize this, but this is the actual data that has been put forward by Niti Aayog. And less than 40% of Indian women, about 60% in the urban, have only 40% have support for domestic caregiving. Okay, so it means that 60% of women, especially in the urban regions, they do not have support systems at home to take care of their homes while they are trying to get employed elsewhere, which means there is some sort of a sustainability issue here, which has to be actually dealt with from the socio-economic perspective first, and probably from the environment perspective next. But we have to have a starting place to do this. So I actually give this as, a challenge to people who are taking sustainability courses, and with me we have an elaborate discussion on these aspects, and I tell them that let us have a group discussion and come up with sort of selective measures that we can look at specifically to resolve this issue. So since we cannot do this, I leave it to today's class to have this introspection within yourselves and come up with suitable policies which can help to address these issues. So if you see, SDG number 5 also deals with women leadership roles. This is just to show you Andaman and Nicobar is actually the highest among union territories, Andaman and Nicobar and Chandigarh, and among the states Kerala and Sikkim, which show very high women leadership in positions of decision making, right? And Puducherry, if you see, and Bihar state and Puducherry, they are the least. So this is another example that I give to come up with some sort of policy which can drive scientifically, value-based, and also societally how we can improve the SDGs in this sector. So with this, I stop today's class and we can have some discussion on this. It is not possible for us to exhaustively cover all aspects, but I try to put in whatever are the principles in place along with what goals we want to achieve to give an idea of where we stand and how we can move forward. Thank you for today's class and thank you for your attention. I hope we can have more discussions now. So I'm stopping my presentation here. Anybody has any questions?